I am Paige, 33 years old, and a senior forensic accountant. When my brother announced baby number 5, my parents cheered. Dad beamed, telling him what a great job he did. Then Mom glanced at me with a cold smirk. "You will handle the kids," she declared. I said absolutely not. My sister-in-law snapped, telling me I had no family, and this was my training. I left without another word. The next morning, the police called. "Hello, ma'am. This is Officer Daniels. Someone left 4 children on your porch. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family." The nightmare began exactly 14 hours earlier in the private dining room of Le Petit Chateau, a French restaurant in downtown Seattle where appetizers cost more than my first car. The chandelier above us dripped with crystal, casting fractured light over the pristine tablecloth. I sat at the far end of the table, nursing a glass of sparkling water, watching my family perform their theater of success. Trent, my brother, sat at the head of the table. He tossed the keys to his Range Rover onto the marble surface with a loud clack. The gold of his Rolex caught the light. Beside him sat Jasmine, my sister-in-law. Her box braids were styled into an immaculate updo, her manicured fingers resting over her designer clutch. She carried an air of manufactured royalty, a byproduct of marrying the Silicon Valley prodigy my parents worshipped. "All right, everyone, listen up right now," Trent announced, tapping his silver fork against his crystal wine glass. He did not wait for silence. He simply demanded it. "Jasmine and I did not just bring you all here to celebrate my company's latest quarterly projections. We have bigger news." Jasmine placed a hand over her perfectly flat stomach, her lips curling into a smile that was equal parts triumphant and smug. "We are expecting number 5. My mother, Barbara, gasped loudly immediately, throwing her hands in the air. "Oh, Trent, Jasmine, that is magnificent news." She rushed around the table, practically shoving a waiter aside to wrap her arms around Trent's neck. 5 beautiful grandchildren. The legacy continues. My father, Richard, leaned back in his leather chair, a cigar unlit between his fingers. He raised his glass of expensive bourbon. "Great job, son. Building the empire at the office and at home. That is what it takes to be a true leader." I offered a polite, measured smile. "Congratulations to you both," I said quietly. As a forensic accountant who spent her days investigating corporate fraud, my entire life was built on logic, risk assessment, and hard numbers. 5 children under the age of 9, raised by a couple who spent more time at charity galas in Napa Valley than in their own living room, seemed like a catastrophic miscalculation. But I had long ago learned to keep my professional assessments out of our family dinners. "It is going to be a highly stressful pregnancy, though." Jasmine sighed dramatically, pressing a delicate hand to her forehead. "The doctor said I need absolute peace, absolute tranquility. Trent's startup is entering a crucial funding round, and our house is just chaotic with the 4 little ones running around everywhere." "Of course it is, darling," Barbara cooed, patting Jasmine's shoulder before turning her gaze directly to me. The warmth in my mother's eyes vanished instantly, replaced by the calculating managerial stare she usually reserved for hired help. "Which is why we have already come up with the perfect solution. Paige, starting next week, the 4 kids will be moving into your house during the weekdays." The dining room suddenly felt unnaturally quiet. The clinking of silverware stopped completely. I set my glass down on the coaster. I did not blink. I did not react. I just stared at my mother, waiting for the punchline of a terrible joke. When none came, I spoke, my voice completely flat and even. "Excuse me, you heard me?" Barbara said, waving her hand as if swatting away a fly. "You work from home half the time anyway. You just sit in front of spreadsheets all day. You have that massive empty 4-bedroom house in the suburbs that you bought for absolutely no reason, since it is just you. The kids will stay with you from Monday to Friday so Jasmine can rest." "Absolutely not," I said. The air in the room instantly crystallized. Trent let out a loud scoff, shaking his head as he reached for his wine glass. Jasmine's smug smile hardened into a sharp sneer. She leaned forward, her dark eyes narrowing as she glared at me. Excuse me, did you just say no to your own family? I said absolutely not. I repeated, enunciating each syllable clearly. I am a senior forensic accountant. I do not just sit in front of spreadsheets. I work 60-hour weeks. I am not a free daycare center, and I am certainly not taking in 4 young children because you decided to have a 5th one you cannot manage. Richard slammed his hand onto the table, making the fine china rattle. Paige, watch your tone with your sister-in-law. They are bringing new life into this family. You will do your part to support your brother. My part? I asked, my voice deadly calm. My part is congratulating them. Raising their children for 5 days a week is not my part. Jasmine let out a sharp, mocking laugh. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering on my tailored, practical pantsuit. Oh, please, Paige. What else are you doing with your time? You are 33. You have no husband, no children, no actual family of your own. You should be thanking us. Think of this as your training for when you land a man. I replied coldly, I certainly do not need to justify my life choices. To a woman who uses pregnancy as an excuse to avoid parenting the children she already has. I finished my sentence without raising my voice. Trent slammed his hands flat against the heavy mahogany table. The crystal wine glasses shuddered. Several patrons at nearby tables turned their heads, their hushed conversations faltering. But my brother did not care about public decorum. He only cared about his bruised ego. He pointed a trembling finger directly at my face. Do not you dare speak to my wife like that, he hissed, his face flushing a deep, angry red. We are giving you the opportunity to actually contribute to this family's legacy. You are single, Paige. You are alone. You owe us this. I owe you absolutely nothing, I countered smoothly. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap. I bought my house with my own money. I built my career without a single cent from Richard's investment firm. I am fully independent, which means I have the luxury of saying no. Jasmine let out a theatrical gasp, placing a protective hand over her chest, as if I had physically struck her. She looked at my mother with wide, victimized eyes. Barbara, do you hear how she speaks to us? After everything we do to keep this family growing and thriving. Barbara's face twisted into an ugly mask of indignation. She pushed her chair back, the wooden legs scraping harshly against the floor, and marched over to my side of the table. She leaned down, invading my personal space, her expensive perfume suffocating in its intensity. You ungrateful little brat, she whispered harshly. Your brother is changing the tech world. He is building the future. The least you can do is take the burden off his shoulders. You have no real responsibilities. You are being entirely selfish. Selfish, I repeated, tasting the bitter irony of the word. I looked directly at my father, who was swirling the amber liquid in his glass, with an expression of supreme disappointment. You know what is actually selfish? Demanding that your daughter sacrifice her hard-earned career to enable your son's chronic irresponsibility. If Trent and Jasmine genuinely need help managing their own household, they can hire a professional live-in nanny. Trent brags constantly about his Series B funding. Surely a nanny is within the budget of a Silicon Valley prodigy. Trent swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. I watched him closely. As a forensic accountant, my entire job consisted of spotting anomalies and reading the hidden truths behind carefully constructed facades. Trent projected immense wealth, but his body language screamed of absolute panic. The Rolex on his wrist was real, but the nervous sweat beating at his temples, despite the cool air conditioning of the restaurant, told a different story. I do not want strangers raising my kids. Trent stammered, his voice losing some of its aggressive edge. I want family. You want free labor, I corrected him instantly. Jasmine rolled her eyes, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. Her smug demeanor returned as she looked down her nose at me. You are just bitter, Paige. You are bitter because Trent is wildly successful and I have a beautiful growing family while you go home to an empty, silent house every single night. This is exactly why no man wants to deal with you. You are cold. You completely lack the maternal instinct that makes a real woman valuable. You do not understand the sacred duty of raising a family because you are broken. If having a maternal instinct means dumping my 4 children onto my sister-in-law so I can get daily foot massages and day drink by the pool, then yes, Jasmine, I am completely devoid of it, I replied. Richard slammed his fist onto the table this time. That is enough, he roared, silencing the entire dining room. The waiter who had been approaching with our main courses promptly turned around and fled back to the kitchen. Paige, you will apologize to your brother and your sister-in-law right now. You are acting like a petulant child. You will take those kids on Monday, and you will do it with a smile on your face. I looked at the man who had spent my entire life treating me like a backup plan. Dad, I am 33 years old. I do not take orders from you. We paid for your upbringing, Barbara snapped, moving back to her seat, but keeping her furious gaze pinned on me. We gave you a roof over your head. We clothed you. You owe this family a debt you can never repay, and taking in your nieces and nephews is just a small fraction of what you should be offering us. Let us be completely accurate about history, Mom, I said, maintaining my icy composure. You paid for Trent's upbringing. You paid for Trent's private college tuition. You paid for Trent's luxury wedding. I took out student loans. I worked night shifts to pay for my certifications. I have never asked either of you for a dime since the day I turned 18. You do not get to cash in on a debt that does not exist. Jasmine sneered, shaking her head. You are so obsessed with money, Paige. It is pathetic. You hoard your little paycheck in that massive house while your own blood struggles with the beautiful burden of creating the next generation. It is practically a sin to keep all those empty bedrooms when your brother's family is feeling cramped. You should be offering us your home out of the goodness of your heart. I analyzed Trent again. He was gripping the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles were white. His eyes darted toward the exit, then back to me. He was desperate, and it was not about finding a babysitter. It was about offloading a massive financial and physical liability. You are not getting my house, and you are not getting my free labor, I stated firmly, leaving zero room for negotiation. If you two cannot handle the children you already have, stop having more. It is a simple equation. Trent sprang from his chair, knocking it backward. It hit the floor with a loud crash. You arrogant, miserable spinster, he shouted. We are giving you a purpose. Without us, you are nothing but a human calculator. I did not flinch. I slowly stood up, smoothing out the invisible creases in my tailored trousers. I reached into my leather purse, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and tossed it casually onto the center of the table. It fluttered down, landing right next to Trent's car keys. That covers my sparkling water and the appetizer I did not touch, I said quietly. Enjoy your celebration. Do not bring your children to my house. The door will not open. If you walk out that door, Paige, you are dead to this family. Richard yelled, his face purple with rage. You will be cut out of my will. You will get absolutely nothing. I paused, turning my head to look back at my father one last time. Dad, you cut me out the day Trent was born. I am just making it official. I turned on my heel and walked away. The heavy silence of the private dining room shattered the moment my back was turned. My mother shrieked my name, a shrill, desperate sound that echoed off the crystal chandeliers. But I did not break my stride. I did not look back. The satisfying click of my heels against the polished hardwood floor was the only rhythm I cared to follow. As I navigated through the main dining area, the hushed whispers of other patrons washed over me. They had clearly heard Richard's final bellow, but I held my head high, projecting an aura of absolute indifference. The maitre d' gave me a sympathetic, tight-lipped smile as he opened the heavy glass door to the street. The crisp Seattle night air hit my face instantly, cooling the residual heat of the confrontation. I handed my ticket to the valet, taking a deep, cleansing breath. For 33 years, I had allowed that family to dictate my worth. I had allowed them to treat my accomplishments as footnotes, and my independence as an insult to their manufactured legacy. Tonight the chain was finally severed. My phone began to vibrate wildly in my purse before the valet even brought my car around. I pulled the device out and glanced at the glowing screen. 5 missed calls from Barbara. A barrage of text messages from Jasmine, each one more unhinged than the last. She called me a heartless spinster, a jealous failure, and a disgrace to the family name. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I felt nothing but profound, liberating relief. I switched the phone to silent, slid it back into my bag, and thanked the valet as my sleek sedan pulled up to the curb. During the quiet drive back to the suburbs, my analytical mind began to process the data points of the evening. My profession as a forensic accountant trained me to ignore the emotional noise and focus entirely on the hard evidence. Trent's behavior was the glaring anomaly. My brother was inherently lazy, entitled, and perfectly willing to exploit anyone for his own comfort. But he was also deeply arrogant. Begging me, shouting at me in a public place, and sweating through his designer suit did not align with his usual brand of lazy arrogance. He was frantic. Jasmine's desperate attempt to mask her panic with cruelty only confirmed my suspicions. They were not just looking for a free babysitter so she could enjoy a relaxing pregnancy. They were trying to offload a massive liability. Trent was drowning in something much deeper than domestic chaos, and he wanted me to hold his heaviest anchors while he dealt with the fallout. I pulled into the driveway of my sprawling four-bedroom house. The property sat on a quiet, tree-lined street, a testament to my relentless work ethic and financial discipline. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the pristine foyer. The silence of the house wrapped around me like a protective blanket. There were no screaming children, no passive-aggressive mothers, no entitled brothers demanding the fruits of my labor. It was just me, my success, and my hard-earned peace. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of expensive red wine, and sat at the granite island. I opened my phone again. The notification count had tripled. Richard had left a scathing voicemail threatening to ensure my accounting firm fired me. I took a sip of my wine and chuckled. My father severely overestimated his influence. I was a senior partner with an impeccable track record. His empty threats were the dying gasps of a patriarch who had just lost his favorite scapegoat. I systematically went through my contacts. I blocked Richard. I blocked Barbara. I blocked Trent. I blocked Jasmine. I severed their digital access to me with the same cold precision I used to audit fraudulent corporate accounts. I finished my wine, went upstairs, and moved through my nightly skincare routine with deliberate slowness. When I finally slid between the high thread count sheets of my king-sized bed, I felt lighter than I had in a decade. I had drawn an impenetrable boundary. I had stared down the toxic core of my family and walked away completely unscathed. I closed my eyes, convinced that the worst was finally over. I believed my decisive exit had ended their campaign of manipulation for good. I fell into a deep, restful sleep, absolutely certain that my Monday morning would consist of nothing but spreadsheets, hot coffee, and professional silence. I was completely wrong. The shrill, piercing ring of my cell phone shattered the quiet of my bedroom. I jolted awake, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The digital clock on my nightstand glowed with the time. It was 5:45 in the morning. I never received calls this early unless it was a severe corporate emergency or a security breach at the office. I grabbed the phone, squinting against the harsh light of the screen. It was an unknown number. Every instinct told me to ignore it, but the persistent ringing demanded an answer. I cleared my throat, trying to shake off the heavy remnants of sleep. "Hello?" I answered, my voice thick but professional. "Hello, ma'am. Is this Paige Evans?" a deep, authoritative voice asked. "Yes," I replied, sitting up and pulling the duvet tightly around my shoulders. "Who is this?" "This is Officer Daniels with the local police precinct. I am currently standing in your driveway. Ma'am, someone has left 4 children and a mountain of luggage on your front porch." The air in my lungs vanished. The bedroom spun for a fraction of a second as the impossible words registered in my brain. My blood ran ice cold. The peaceful victory I had secured the night before evaporated in an instant, replaced by a surging spike of pure adrenaline. "I will be right down," I managed to say, throwing the covers aside and sprinting for the stairs. I grabbed my thick cotton robe from the hook behind my bedroom door, shoving my arms into the sleeves as I took the stairs 2 at a time. My bare feet slapped against the cold hardwood floors, echoing loudly in the suffocating silence of my house. My mind raced frantically, trying to find a logical explanation for what the police officer had just told me over the phone. A sick, twisting sensation settled deep in my gut. Trent and Jasmine would not dare. They could not possibly be that reckless. Yet as I reached the foyer and stared at the heavy oak front door, I knew exactly what awaited me on the other side. I disengaged the deadbolt and yanked the door open. The crisp morning fog immediately rolled over the threshold, bringing with it the sharp bite of a Pacific Northwest dawn. Standing squarely on my welcome mat was Officer Daniels, a tall, broad-shouldered policeman in his early 40s. His expression was a mixture of stern authority and deep visible discomfort. He held a small notepad in one hand and a flashlight in the other, though the sun was just beginning to cast a pale gray light over my manicured lawn. Behind him, huddled together in a pathetic shivering mass, were my 4 nieces and nephews. My breath caught in my throat. I stood frozen in the doorway, my hands gripping the edges of my robe. The reality of the scene was far more jarring than the phone call had prepared me for. 8-year-old Marcus, the eldest, stood protectively in front of his siblings. He was struggling to hold 2-year-old Chloe, who was whimpering quietly, dressed only in a thin pink windbreaker that offered zero protection against the 45-degree morning chill. 5-year-old Leo and 4-year-old Maya were perched awkwardly atop a literal mountain of luggage. 8 massive overstuffed Louis Vuitton suitcases were stacked haphazardly across my porch, completely blocking the pathway. The children clutched small cartoon-themed backpacks to their chests. Their eyes were wide, bloodshot, and utterly terrified. They looked like refugees displaced by a sudden disaster, not the offspring of a Silicon Valley tech CEO. Auntie Paige Marcus whispered, his voice trembling so violently his teeth were chattering. "Daddy said we are living with you now." I stared at him, absolute disbelief rooting my feet to the floorboards. The sheer audacity of my brother and sister-in-law was paralyzing. They had bypassed negotiation entirely and resorted to literal abandonment. "Officer," I managed to say, forcing my voice to remain steady despite the roaring in my ears. "What exactly happened here?" Officer Daniels stepped aside slightly, gesturing to the mountain of designer luggage and the freezing children. "A neighbor on her morning jog called it in about 20 minutes ago," he explained, his tone strictly professional but laced with underlying disgust. "She reported seeing a black Range Rover pull up to your curb at exactly 5 in the morning. A man and a woman unloaded the kids, and these bags instructed the children to sit on the porch and then sped off. They did not even bother to ring the doorbell or wait to see if anyone opened it." "Ma'am, do you know these children?" "They are my brother's kids," I said, a wave of protective instinct finally overriding my shock. I stepped out onto the porch, ignoring the freezing concrete against my bare feet. "Marcus, bring everyone inside right now. It is freezing out there. Get them into the warm house." The children did not need to be told twice. Marcus practically dragged his heavy shoes across the threshold, hauling Chloe inside. Leo and Maya slid off the expensive suitcases and scurried past me like frightened mice. I immediately pulled the heavy throw blanket from the hall closet and draped it tightly around Chloe, who was burying her tear-streaked face into her older brother's neck. I ushered them toward the living room, pointing them to the large sectional sofa near the fireplace. Officer Daniels stepped into the foyer, his heavy boots thudding against the floor. His eyes swept over the pristine, child-free interior of my home before settling back on me. "Ma'am, I need to be completely clear with you about the severity of this situation. Leaving children unattended on a porch in this temperature with no adult supervision and no guarantee the homeowner is even present is textbook child endangerment. I need to contact their parents immediately. Do you have their direct phone numbers?" "I have their numbers," I said, crossing my arms tightly to keep my own hands from shaking. "But my brother and his wife are not answering. I blocked them last night after a massive dispute regarding this exact scenario. They demanded I take the children so they could have a peaceful pregnancy. I refused. This is their retaliation." The officer stopped writing in his notepad and looked up, his brow furrowed in disbelief. They dumped 4 kids on a porch because you refused to be a free babysitter. I nodded, the clinical forensic part of my brain clicking into high gear. The emotional shock was fading, replaced by a cold, calculating fury. My brother and his wife had crossed a legal line, treating their own children like disposable luggage. But something still felt incredibly off. Trent was arrogant, but he was also terrified of public scandal. Dumping his kids on a suburban porch where anyone could see him, where a neighbor had indeed seen him, was reckless. It was the action of a desperate man running out of time, not a petty brother trying to win an argument. "I need to review my security cameras," I told the officer, turning toward the digital panel mounted on the wall of my hallway. "My entire property is wired with high-definition surveillance. If they pulled up to my curb, I have them on tape. I have the exact time, the license plate, and high-resolution footage of them abandoning these minors." Officer Daniels nodded firmly. "Please pull that up. We need to document everything. If we cannot reach the parents, I am legally obligated to contact Child Protective Services. These children cannot simply be left in limbo." The threat of Child Protective Services hung heavy in the air. I looked over at the living room where my 4 nieces and nephews were huddled together under the blanket, shivering and silent. They were innocent collateral damage in Trent and Jasmine's toxic game. I was not going to let them be thrown into the foster care system, but I was also not going to let my brother get away with this profound abuse. I walked over to the security panel, ready to uncover exactly how Trent and Jasmine had executed their cowardly escape. I tapped the glowing screen of the security panel, my fingers flying across the smooth glass with practiced precision. Officer Daniels stepped up close behind me, the thick leather of his utility belt creaking slightly as he leaned in to get a better view of the high-definition monitor. I accessed the main exterior camera feed and quickly scrubbed the digital timeline backward. I dragged the slider past the arrival of the police cruiser, past the neighbor jogging with her golden retriever, until the timestamp in the upper right corner read exactly 5 o'clock in the morning. I pressed play. The pristine night vision feed flared to life on the screen. The street was empty and blanketed in thick coastal fog. Seconds later, a sleek black Range Rover tore around the corner, its headlights piercing the gloom. The vehicle did not simply pull up to the curb, it swerved aggressively, the front right tire completely mounting the edge of my manicured lawn before slamming to a sudden halt. Trent was behind the wheel. The driver's side door flew open before the car had even fully settled into park. My brother stumbled out, tripping over his own expensive loafers in his frantic haste. He rushed to the trunk and popped it open, moving with an uncoordinated, frantic energy that I had never witnessed from him before. Trent was a man who prided himself on absolute control and calculated movements, a carefully curated image designed to impress wealthy venture capitalists. The man on this screen looked like a cornered, terrified animal. Jasmine emerged from the passenger side a moment later. She was wearing dark, oversized sunglasses. Despite the pitch-black morning, a heavy designer trench coat pulled tightly around her frame. She did not walk to the rear doors to help her own children. She marched straight up my driveway, checking her brightly illuminated phone screen every 2 seconds, her head swiveling erratically, as if she expected someone to jump out from the bushes and arrest her on the spot. Trent began hauling the massive Louis Vuitton suitcases out of the trunk, practically hurling them onto the concrete of my front porch. He was sweating visibly in the chilly air, his face pale and contorted with sheer panic. One of the heavy bags slipped from his grasp and crashed down onto the steps, but he did not bother to pick it up. He just kicked it forward ruthlessly. Then the rear doors opened. Marcus climbed out first, dutifully holding his little sister Chloe. Leo and Maya followed, clutching their tiny backpacks, rubbing sleep from their confused eyes. They looked incredibly tiny and vulnerable standing in the cold driveway. Trent did not embrace them. He did not kneel down to offer any words of comfort or promise a swift return. He simply pointed a trembling finger toward my heavy oak door and shoved the children forward. Jasmine stood on the porch, tapping her foot impatiently. As Marcus guided his siblings up the steps, Jasmine leaned down and pointed a sharp, manicured finger directly in the 8-year-old boy's face. The camera did not record audio, but her hostile body language was unmistakable. It was a vicious threat, a harsh command to stay put and remain completely silent. She did not kiss their foreheads. She did not offer a single gesture of maternal affection. As soon as the youngest child cleared the top step, Jasmine spun around and sprinted back to the Range Rover. Trent slammed the trunk shut, scrambled into the driver's seat, and threw the vehicle into reverse. The tires squealed loudly against the asphalt, leaving dark rubber marks on the street as they peeled out of the neighborhood at an absurd speed, swallowed instantly by the morning fog. I paused the video, freezing the frame on the 4 abandoned children staring blankly at my closed front door. A heavy, suffocating silence filled my foyer. Officer Daniels let out a slow, rugged exhale, running a hand over his short, cropped hair. "That is one of the most disgraceful things I have seen in 20 years on the force," he said, his voice thick with suppressed anger. "They tossed those kids away like expired baggage." I stared at the frozen image of my brother fleeing the scene. The panic rising in my chest was sharp and undeniable. This was not a petty family squabble about free childcare. This was not a spiteful stunt engineered to punish me for refusing their demands at the restaurant the night before. The math of their behavior simply did not add up. Trent and Jasmine were utterly obsessed with their social standing. They lived for the admiration of their wealthy peers and investors. Leaving their children on a freezing porch while speeding away like fugitives was social suicide if anyone ever found out. They were running from something massive, something terrifying enough to eclipse their vanity and their parental instincts entirely. My analytical brain rapidly cataloged the data points: the frantic haste, the lack of goodbyes, the sheer volume of luggage indicating a permanent relocation rather than a short holiday, the erratic driving, the total disregard for the safety of their own flesh and blood. They were not going on a relaxing baby moon to Dubai, as my mother had so proudly proclaimed at dinner. They were escaping jurisdiction. I turned away from the security panel, forcing myself to push the mounting dread down into a dark locked box in my mind. Right now, the only thing that mattered was the innocent collateral damage sitting in my living room. I walked slowly toward the sectional sofa. The 4 children were huddled together exactly where I had left them. Marcus was sitting rigidly upright, his arm wrapped securely around Leo. Little Maya had curled into a tight ball against her older brother's side, while Chloe had finally fallen asleep, her tiny face buried deeply in the thick folds of my throw blanket. Marcus looked up at me, his brown eyes swimming with unshed tears. He was trying so hard to be incredibly brave, attempting to shoulder the crushing weight of a responsibility no young boy should ever have to carry. The sight of them so small and utterly defenseless against the harsh reality of their parents' abandonment galvanized every ounce of protective instinct I possessed. "Auntie Paige," he whispered, his voice cracking under the immense emotional strain. "Mom said we have to be perfectly quiet and not cause any trouble, or else we will ruin everything for them. She said they are going on a very special airplane far away, and they cannot take us along because we cost too much money and slow them down." I sank to my knees on the plush living room rug, bringing myself down to his eye level. The stark reality of their profound confusion broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. They had been discarded by the 2 people who were supposed to protect them from the monsters of the world. I reached out and gently smoothed a hand over Marcus's trembling shoulder. "You are not going to ruin anything, sweetheart," I promised softly, making sure my voice radiated nothing but absolute safety and unwavering strength. "You are safe here. You are wanted here." I swallowed the lump of absolute rage burning intensely in my throat, vowing silently that I would tear my brother's entire life apart piece by piece for what he had just done. I stood up, ensuring my face projected calm. I smiled at Marcus, tucked the blanket around Chloe, and promised I would return. I walked to the foyer where Officer Daniels stood waiting. I dialed my mother's number. My hands were perfectly steady. The initial shock had evaporated, replaced by cold precision. I activated the speakerphone, holding the device between us. I wanted an official witness. She answered instantly. Her voice was crisp. "Well," Barbara said, her tone dripping with venom, "I assume you are calling to complain." "Mom," I said evenly. Trent and Jasmine dumped 4 children on my porch at 5 in the morning and sped off. They left a mountain of luggage. A police officer is standing in my foyer, assessing this as an active child endangerment scene. "You called the police?" Barbara shrieked. Her voice echoed off my ceilings. Officer Daniels raised an eyebrow. "Are you completely insane, Paige? Tell that officer to leave your property right now. There is no emergency. You are making a massive scene out of nothing." "Nothing," I repeated. They abandoned 4 minors in freezing weather. They did not ring the bell. They fled the scene in a vehicle. "They did not flee?" My mother snapped. "They had an early flight to catch today. Trent and Jasmine are on their way to the airport. They are flying to Dubai for a 3-week baby moon to celebrate the new pregnancy. Jasmine needs absolute tranquility, and Trent needs a break from his startup. We discussed this at dinner last night. You agreed to take the children." "I did not agree to anything," I shot back. "I explicitly refused. I threw money on the table and walked out. Do not attempt to rewrite reality just because your golden boy needed a getaway." "You are twisting the narrative," Paige Barbara insisted. "You were incredibly difficult at dinner. You always throw these tantrums when the spotlight is not on you. But family is family. We knew you would come to your senses. Trent simply dropped them off. You have a huge house and no responsibilities. It is just 3 weeks. Stop acting like a martyr and do your job as an aunt." Officer Daniels cleared his throat. "Ma'am, this is Officer Daniels. I am standing here verifying that these children were abandoned outside without supervision. That is a criminal offense regardless of any alleged family agreements." There was a sharp intake of breath. The presence of law enforcement derailed her confidence, but Barbara was a master manipulator. She pivoted quickly, her tone turning sickeningly sweet and placating. "Officer, I apologize for my daughter's dramatic behavior," she said smoothly. "Paige has a history of exaggerating situations for attention. This is merely a family misunderstanding. Trent and Jasmine are excellent parents. They simply thought Paige was awake and waiting for the kids. There is absolutely no need for police involvement. Paige is a fully capable adult who is fine taking care of her own nieces and nephews." "Do not try to manage the police, Mom," I interrupted coldly. "And do not try to manage me. This has nothing to do with a misunderstanding." I reviewed my security footage. They looked terrified. They practically threw the suitcases onto the concrete. People going on a luxury vacation do not run from their children like criminals dodging an arrest warrant. Why did they really leave? "They are going to Dubai." Barbara barked, her patience shattering again. "You are spinning ridiculous conspiracy theories because you are jealous of your brother. You have always been jealous of his success, his marriage, and his beautiful family. You are just sitting alone in that giant house, desperate to drag him down to your miserable level." "Jealous of a man who abandons his toddlers in the dark?" I asked softly. "I think I will pass on that brand of success." "Listen to me very carefully, Paige," my mother hissed, dropping all pretense of maternal affection. Her voice turned into a low, vicious threat. "You will thank the officer for his time. You will send him away. You will bring those children inside, and you will care for them for the next 3 weeks without uttering another word of complaint. If you do not comply, and if you dare to file a police report against your own brother and jeopardize his reputation, your father and I will destroy you." I glanced at Officer Daniels. He was taking furious notes, his jaw clenched tight. "Destroy me exactly how I challenged her." "We will financially ruin you," she threatened openly. "Your father has immense influence in the corporate sector. We will make sure your accounting firm drops you. We will socially exile you from this family forever. You will never attend another holiday, another wedding, or another funeral. You will be completely cut off, isolated, and left with absolutely nothing." "Do not test me, Paige. You are just a backup plan. You have always been a backup plan. Do what you are told and raise those kids, or face the consequences of crossing this family." I felt a cold smile stretch across my face. The sheer arrogance of her threats was astounding, especially since she was delivering them on a recorded line in front of a sworn police officer. She thought she still held the power. She thought I was still the obedient and overlooked daughter who would fold under the pressure of parental disappointment. She had no idea who she was dealing with. "You cannot ruin a woman who built her own empire," I replied evenly, "and you cannot exile someone who already walked away. Have a terrible morning, Mom." I tapped the red button, cutting off her frantic screaming. The silence in the foyer returned heavy with the aftermath of the confrontation. I looked at Officer Daniels. He pocketed his notepad and gave me a grim nod. The battle lines were officially drawn, and my family had just handed me all the ammunition I needed to strike back. Officer Daniels exhaled sharply, shaking his head as he secured his pen in his uniform pocket. "Ma'am, I have responded to hundreds of domestic disturbance calls," he said, his voice dropping lower. "I have heard every threat in the book. But the blatant disregard for these children that your mother just demonstrated on a recorded line is staggering. Unfortunately, her refusal to provide immediate assistance or contact the fleeing parents leaves us in a very rigid legal predicament." I turned to face him, fully crossing my arms to suppress the tremors in my hands. "What exactly does that mean for the children right now?" Officer Daniels looked past my shoulder toward the living room. The 4 kids remained huddled on the sectional sofa. The oldest boy was staring at us with wide, terrified eyes, his small arms wrapped protectively around his shivering younger brother. The youngest girl was still asleep under the thick blanket, oblivious to the bureaucratic storm. "It means I am legally bound by protocol," Officer Daniels stated, meeting my gaze squarely. "Trent and his wife committed child abandonment by leaving minors unattended on a freezing porch. They fled the scene. Your mother, despite claiming to be aware of the situation, refused to intervene or provide a safe handover. Under state law, these children are now officially wards of the state. I am required to call Child Protective Services immediately." The words felt like a physical blow. The foster care system. My mind flashed to grim statistics from my audits. The system was notoriously overcrowded, severely underfunded, and chronically traumatizing for children violently separated from their familiar environments. "You cannot call CPS," I said, firmly, taking a step toward the officer. "They are innocent. They have just been traumatized by their own parents abandoning them in the dark. Putting them in a police cruiser and handing them over to strangers in the foster system will destroy them." "I do not want to put them in the system," Page Officer Daniels replied, using my first name to emphasize the gravity of our situation. "I am a father myself. The last thing I want to do is traumatize those kids further. But my badge dictates my actions. If the biological parents are missing and no legal guardian is present, CPS has to take custody for their protection." "I am their aunt," I countered quickly, gesturing to myself. "I am standing right here. I am a stable, successful adult with a clean record and a secure home. I can take them." Officer Daniels pulled a thick stack of folded paperwork from inside his duty jacket. "Being a blood relative does not automatically grant you legal custody in the eyes of the state. However, because you are a verified family member with a safe residence, there is a legal workaround we can execute right now to prevent CPS from dispatching a social worker to your door." He unfolded the documents and laid them flat on my entryway console table. He handed me a heavy metal pen. "This is a 48-hour emergency temporary guardianship form," he explained, pointing to the dense legal jargon filling the pages. "By signing this, you are formally accepting full legal and physical responsibility for all 4 minors for the next 2 days. It keeps them out of the foster system and legally covers both you and the department. But you need to understand exactly what you are signing." I looked down at the paperwork. The stark black ink represented a massive shift in my life. "If you sign this, you are on the hook," Officer Daniels warned, his tone uncompromising. "Trent and his wife clearly intended to dump their responsibilities onto you. By taking them in, you are essentially giving them exactly what they wanted. You are accepting the burden." "I am not giving them what they want," I replied coldly, my eyes scanning the liability clauses on the second page. "They wanted me to take the children off the books. They wanted me to be a silent, free babysitter so they could gallivant across the globe without consequence. Signing a police-issued legal document establishes a formal paper trail. It proves they abandoned their children. It proves I had to assume emergency guardianship under law enforcement supervision to prevent state intervention. Officer Daniels nodded slowly, a look of profound respect crossing his weathered features. You are building a case against them. I am a forensic accountant, I said, clicking the pen. I document everything. My brother thinks he pulled off the perfect escape. He thinks he can manipulate me through guilt and force. What he actually did was hand me the exact legal leverage I need to destroy him. I leaned over the console table and signed my name on the bottom of the first page. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper echoed loudly in the quiet foyer. I flipped to the second page, initialed the liability waivers, and signed the final declaration. I was fully aware of the immense weight settling onto my shoulders. 4 young, traumatized lives were now entirely dependent on my ability to navigate the upcoming storm. The clock starts now, Officer Daniels said, taking the paperwork and sliding the carbon copy across the table for my records. You have 48 hours of legal protection. During this window, you must make a decision about seeking long-term guardianship or handing them over to the state if the parents do not return. I will file my police report regarding the abandonment at the precinct before my shift ends. The documentation will be in the system. Thank you, officer, I said, picking up the yellow carbon copy. Do not thank me yet, he replied, adjusting his duty belt. Your mother made her intentions clear on that phone call. Your family is going to come after you. Protect yourself, Paige, and protect those kids. Officer Daniels tipped his uniform cap and walked out into the chilly morning fog. I closed the heavy oak door, engaged the deadbolt, and flipped the security system to its maximum setting. The metal lock clicked, sealing the house. I turned around and faced the 4 terrified children huddled in my living room. They were my priority now. I needed to stabilize the environment. Jackson was still gripping his younger brother, his small shoulders tight with defensive tension. I walked into the kitchen, keeping my movements slow. I put a pot of milk on the stove for hot chocolate and popped several thick slices of sourdough bread into the toaster. The smell of food worked faster than comforting words. When I carried the tray of toast butter and steaming mugs into the living room, 4 pairs of eyes tracked my every movement. I set the tray on the coffee table. I did not push them to talk. I simply told them they were safe, that breakfast was ready, and that nobody was going to force them to go anywhere. Hunger eventually won out over fear. Jackson reached for a piece of toast first, taking a cautious bite before handing a second slice to Leo. Even 2-year-old Lily stirred from her sleep, drawn by the scent of chocolate. I sat in the armchair across from them, sipping black coffee, watching them eat. As the warmth of the food filled their small bodies, the violent shivering finally stopped. While they ate, my mind began to automatically categorize the discrepancies of the morning. I am a forensic accountant. I hunt anomalies for a living. I track missing millions through labyrinthine corporate structures, offshore accounts, and shell companies. Human behavior, much like financial data, always leaves a trail, and Trent's behavior was a massive red flag. The narrative my mother had aggressively peddled on the phone was that Trent and Jasmine were heading to Dubai for a luxurious 3-week baby moon. That story was fundamentally flawed. You do not pack 8 oversized designer suitcases for a 3-week vacation in the desert. You do not speed away from your own children in the dark without saying goodbye if you plan to return in 21 days. Furthermore, a pregnant woman entering her 2nd trimester flying 14 hours to the Middle East on a whim contradicted Jasmine's dramatic complaints about needing absolute bed rest. The logistics were absurd. The luggage alone indicated a permanent relocation. The reckless drop-off indicated a terrifying urgency. They were not going on vacation, they were running. I waited until the children finished their breakfast. I directed Jackson to the guest bedroom on the ground floor, showing him how to use the television and where the extra blankets were stored. I promised I would be in the kitchen if they needed anything. Once the door clicked shut behind them, I walked straight to my home office. I sat at my mahogany desk and opened my encrypted laptop. The dual monitors flared to life, bathing the room in a blue glow. If my brother was running, he was running from a financial collapse. Trent was the CEO of Apex Dynamics, a revolutionary artificial intelligence startup in Silicon Valley. My father, Richard, was his primary investor, constantly boasting about the company's growth at every dinner. I pulled up the public financial filings first. Apex Dynamics had recently completed a Series B funding round, securing millions from institutional investors. On paper, the company looked like a unicorn in the making, but paper is easily manipulated. I bypassed the public relations fluff and logged into my secure database, utilizing clearance algorithms I reserved for corporate audits. I needed to see the actual money movement. I started by pulling the corporate registration documents. Trent had structured the startup through a web of holding companies registered in Delaware and Nevada, standard practice for tech firms seeking tax leniency. But as I mapped out the subsidiaries on my second monitor, drawing digital connecting lines between the various entities, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. The structure was unnecessarily complex. Legitimate startups streamline their architecture to attract clean venture capital. Trent had built a financial labyrinth designed to obscure the origin and destination of liquid assets. I tapped into the state tax registry and cross-referenced the corporate identification numbers. My fingers flew across the keyboard, typing commands and executing search queries with relentless speed. I bypassed the encrypted layers blocking the public eye. I was looking for the cash burn rate. Startups burn cash, but Trent's burn rate was catastrophic. I pulled up the vendor payout logs for the last 3 fiscal quarters. The numbers glared back at me, stark and damning. Apex Dynamics was not spending its capital on research development or engineering salaries. The outgoing wire transfers were heavily concentrated on high-end real estate leases, luxury vehicle acquisitions, and consulting fees paid out to obscure limited liability companies. I ran a quick background search on 3 of the highest-paid consulting firms. They were ghost entities. They had no websites, no physical office locations, and no listed employees. They were shell companies, and their registered agent was listed under a familiar name. It was a holding group managed directly by my father's investment firm. The ice in my veins thickened. This was not a failing business. This was a highly coordinated embezzlement scheme. Trent was bleeding his investors dry, funneling the pension funds and venture capital through these phantom consulting agencies directly into my father's offshore accounts. Richard was not just an investor. He was actively laundering the stolen money. I leaned closer to the monitor, my eyes scanning the most recent wire transfers. Less than 24 hours ago, right around the time Trent and Jasmine were sitting at that French restaurant, bragging about their new baby, a massive liquidation event had occurred. Every single liquid asset tied to Apex Dynamics had been drained. The corporate accounts were sitting at zero. I stared at the blinking cursor on my secondary monitor, letting the sheer magnitude of that single digit wash over me. A tech startup valued at over $50 million just days ago was now completely hollowed out. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair and pressed the heels of my hands against my tired eyes. Trent had not just skimmed a little profit off the top to fund his lavish lifestyle. He had slaughtered the entire golden goose, gutted it, and set the feathers on fire. I needed to see exactly where the carcass had been buried. I cracked my knuckles, pulled my mechanical keyboard closer, and launched my proprietary tracking software. I bypassed the standard banking portals, entirely tapping directly into the institutional transfer logs using my senior corporate audit credentials. If digital money moved, it left a footprint. You cannot make $15 million evaporate into thin air without displacing the financial atmosphere around it. I started with the most recent transaction block. At exactly 2 o'clock yesterday afternoon, a series of rapid-fire wire transfers had been initiated from the primary Apex Dynamics operating account. Trent had not authorized the transfer as one massive lump sum. He had broken the capital down into 47 separate transfers. Each individual wire hovered just beneath the automatic flagging threshold for federal banking algorithms. It was a classic structuring technique widely known in my industry as smurfing. It was designed to avoid immediate algorithmic detection by the Federal Enforcement Network. But it was incredibly sloppy for a supposed tech genius. I highlighted the destination routing numbers and ran a batch search across international banking registries. The funds had bounced from his Silicon Valley regional bank to a holding account in Delaware, then fractured again into a dozen different streams, heading toward the Cayman Islands, Cyprus, and the Isle of Man. This was the exact point where Trent and his accomplices had tried to be clever. The offshore accounts were shielded behind heavy encryption protocols and registered to proxy directors. A normal corporate auditor would hit a massive brick wall right here. They would require international subpoenas, federal warrants, and months of grueling litigation just to peek behind the curtain of those tax havens. But I was not acting as a normal auditor today, and I was certainly not playing by tedious courtroom rules. I was an angry sister hunting a fugitive who had just dumped 4 traumatized children in my foyer. I ran a cross-reference on the proxy directors listed on the Cayman registry. I deployed a specialized script I had written years ago to scrape metadata from the offshore registration portal itself. The proxy names were obviously fabricated, but the digital fingerprints left by the creators were very real. The IP addresses used to file the original incorporation documents had been masked, but whoever set them up had made a critical error in their security protocol. I traced the originating IP string through the dark web. It bounced through a virtual private network in Switzerland, routed through a proxy server in Iceland, before finally resolving to a static IP address registered right here in downtown Seattle. I typed the numeric string into my terminal and hit enter. The screen flashed green as the registry matched the address to a physical commercial location. It was the private, highly secure network block assigned exclusively to the executive floor of my father's investment firm. My breath caught in my throat. Richard was not just passively looking the other way while Trent mismanaged his venture capital funds. Richard was the primary architect of the escape route. My own father had used his firm's secure enterprise-level network to set up the offshore shell companies for his golden boy. The betrayal tasted like battery acid in the back of my mouth. I had always known my parents favored Trent, but actively participating in a multi-million-dollar federal fraud case to protect him was a level of criminality I had not anticipated. I dug deeper into Richard's server logs, deploying a packet sniffer to download the raw transaction receipts from the past 48 hours. I needed to know exactly what form the stolen assets had taken. The money had not stayed in the Cayman bank accounts. It had been rapidly converted. I tracked the secondary transfers from the island banks to a decentralized cryptocurrency exchange based in Eastern Europe. Trent had liquidated the stolen investor capital into untraceable digital tokens. But again, his arrogance outweighed his actual intelligence. He had moved the digital assets into a cold storage wallet, but he had used an email address associated with one of his previous failed startups to register the exchange account. It was a rookie mistake. I ran a brute force dictionary attack on the email server, exploiting a known vulnerability in their outdated security infrastructure. It took my custom software less than 4 minutes to crack the password. I logged into the exchange and viewed the ledger. The digital tokens had already been transferred out, but the destination wallet address was logged in the history. I ran the wallet address through a blockchain tracking tool. The funds had been used to finalize a massive international real estate transaction late last night. I pulled up the property registry data associated with the blockchain smart contract. The purchase was for a sprawling, heavily fortified luxury villa. I stared at the country code listed on the property deed. It was a sovereign nation in the Mediterranean that famously did not have an active extradition treaty with the United States. The digital paper trail was complete, and the massive financial discrepancies pointed to a highly coordinated intentional international heist. I needed to quantify the exact damage. I shifted my focus from the destination of the stolen capital back to its origin. I pulled the original investor prospectus for Apex Dynamics and cross-referenced it with the incoming wire logs from the past 2 quarters. Trent had boasted about securing venture capital from elite, risk-tolerant billionaires, but the bank records told a vastly different, far more sinister story. The primary source of the $15 million sitting in that Mediterranean villa was not a high-yield tech incubator. It was a regional teachers' union pension fund. My stomach violently turned. Trent had not just defrauded wealthy investors who could afford to take a loss on a failed software gamble. He had systematically embezzled the life savings retirement accounts and future security of thousands of working-class citizens. He had stolen their stability to purchase an untraceable luxury fortress across the globe. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated revulsion. The arrogance required to steal $15 million from a pension fund was staggering, but the sheer cruelty of it was unforgivable. I took a sharp breath, forcing my emotional response down. I needed concrete proof of my father's complicity in the cover-up. I launched a deep dive scan into Richard's investment firm, utilizing a backdoor access point I had discovered during a previous corporate audit of a partner company. My father's firm had acted as the principal underwriter for the Apex Dynamics funding round. That meant Richard was legally responsible for conducting the due diligence and certifying the financial health of Trent's startup before the pension fund released the capital. I located the internal compliance server and accessed the archived audit reports from 6 months ago. At first glance, the documents appeared perfectly legitimate. They bore the digital signatures of Richard's senior compliance officers, complete with glowing projections and falsified revenue streams. But forensic accounting relies on finding the ghost data, the drafts that were deleted, and the edits that were hastily masked. I ran a metadata extraction script on the PDF files. The hidden version history unspooled across my screen, revealing the frantic, desperate attempt to cover their tracks. 3 weeks ago, an independent auditor hired by the pension fund board had requested access to the Apex Dynamics raw financial data. That request had triggered an absolute panic inside my father's firm. I found a string of deleted internal emails between Richard and his chief financial officer. The messages were frantic, filled with demands to alter ledger entries and manufacture fake invoices to justify the missing millions. My father had actively ordered his staff to fabricate revenue reports to satisfy the independent auditor. He had jeopardized his entire firm, his license, and his freedom to protect Trent's blatant theft. But the cover-up had failed. I found the final email in the deleted archive sent directly from the independent auditor to Richard's private inbox yesterday morning at 9 o'clock. The auditor had formally rejected the fabricated financial statements, citing glaring mathematical inconsistencies, and stated their intention to refer the matter to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. That email was the exact catalyst for the sudden escape. Richard had received the official warning of impending federal intervention yesterday morning. By yesterday evening, he was sitting in Le Petit Chateau, smoking a cigar, aggressively demanding that I take in my nieces and nephews. He knew the FBI was coming. He knew Trent was going to run. And he had tried to force me into becoming an unwitting accomplice, saddling me with the physical evidence of his son's ruined life, while they focused on fleeing justice. The $15 million discovery solidified every scattered piece of the puzzle. The frantic early morning drop-off, the staggering amount of designer luggage, the absurd story about a baby moon to Dubai. They needed to move quickly because federal warrants take roughly 48 hours to execute after an initial referral from an independent auditor. Trent had completely drained the corporate accounts yesterday afternoon right before dinner. He had converted the stolen pension funds into cryptocurrency, secured his non-extradition Mediterranean villa, and booked a one-way flight out of the country. But he could not secure a massive multi-ticket first-class reservation for 6 people without triggering a transportation security flag. The children were a logistical nightmare for a man trying to slip through an international airport unnoticed. They required passports, birth certificates, and time-consuming security checks. Trent and Jasmine needed to move fast and travel light, so they discarded their own children like excess baggage to guarantee their own survival. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the damning evidence, illuminating my dual monitors. The sheer scale of the betrayal was monumental. My father had sacrificed the financial futures of innocent teachers and weaponized his own daughter just to shield a criminal. My brother had abandoned his flesh and blood on a freezing porch to avoid a federal prison sentence. They operated under the delusion that their wealth, their status, and their aggressive manipulation could outrun the consequences of a $15 million federal crime. They believed they had effectively neutralized me by treating me as an obedient, disposable pawn. I reached for my encrypted hard drive and plugged it into the secure port on my desk. I began a mass download, copying every single piece of evidence I had just unearthed. I captured the falsified audit reports from Richard's server, the deleted internal emails proving his active participation in the cover-up, the blockchain ledger tracking the cryptocurrency conversion, and the property deed for the Mediterranean villa. I meticulously built a comprehensive airtight digital dossier. Every file was systematically categorized, time-stamped, and cross-referenced with federal statutes regarding wire fraud and embezzlement. My family thought they had left me with a crushing burden, expecting me to quietly raise their discarded children in the shadow of their crimes. They were entirely wrong. I was not just going to survive their betrayal. I was going to use my expertise to ensure they never saw a single day of freedom again. I turned my attention to the most pressing operational detail of their escape: the flight manifests. My mother had emphatically claimed that Trent and his wife were heading to Dubai for a luxurious baby moon. I knew that was a fabricated narrative designed to pacify me, but I needed to know exactly which airspace they were currently occupying. A non-extradition Mediterranean villa was their final destination, but getting there required a specific commercial flight path. You cannot simply charter a private jet for an international escape when your corporate assets have just been flagged by an independent auditor. Private aviation companies run rigorous background checks and require massive upfront wire transfers that Trent could no longer safely execute. He had to rely on commercial airlines. I opened a secure terminal on my desktop and utilized a specialized tracking software I frequently deployed during corporate flight risk assessments. The program interfaced directly with the global distribution systems used by major airlines and travel agencies. I entered Trent's full legal name, his passport number, and his wife's details, setting the search parameters for all outbound international flights departing from the Seattle area within the last 24 hours. The system took less than 30 seconds to compile the data. The results populated on my screen in a neat, undeniable grid. I scanned the departure logs. There was absolutely no flight booked to Dubai under their names. My mother had regurgitated a lie fed to her by a desperate son, or perhaps she had helped concoct the Dubai story herself to buy them enough time to cross international borders. I scrolled down to the actual confirmed booking. Trent had purchased 2 tickets on a major European airline departing Seattle at 6 o'clock this morning. They were flying to Paris. From Paris, their itinerary showed a connecting flight departing immediately for a small, sovereign Mediterranean nation. The exact nation where Trent had purchased his luxury fortress using stolen pension funds. The destination had no active extradition treaty with the United States. If they stepped off that connecting flight and entered that country, the federal government would face an absolute nightmare trying to pull them back to face trial. But as I examined the ticketing data more closely, another glaring detail caught my attention. The timestamp on the booking confirmation was recorded at 1 o'clock this morning, a mere 4 hours before they dumped their children on my freezing porch. I dug deeper into the airline's reservation logs, pulling up the digital transaction history associated with Trent's credit card. The system revealed a trail of frantic failed booking attempts prior to the final confirmation. At midnight, Trent had attempted to book 6 tickets on that exact same flight to Paris. He had tried to purchase seats for himself, his wife, and all 4 of their children. The airline system had returned an automatic rejection error. I pulled the specific flight map to understand why. The flight was a highly popular transatlantic route. There were plenty of seats available in the economy section, enough to easily accommodate a family of 6. But Trent had not attempted to book economy seats. He had specifically requested 6 seats in the exclusive ultra-luxury first-class cabin. The airline's first-class section only contained 8 private suites. 4 of those suites were already occupied by other passengers. Trent was informed by the automated system that there were not enough premium seats to accommodate his entire family. The system offered a clear alternative. He could downgrade his family to the economy or business class sections, where dozens of adjacent seats were completely empty. Or he could wait 48 hours for the next available flight with more premium availability. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. The horrifying reality of their decision crystallized in my mind. Trent and his wife knew the federal authorities were closing in. They knew they had to flee the country immediately to avoid prison. They had the option to take all 4 of their children with them. They could have easily purchased 6 economy tickets and kept their family together during their desperate escape. But sitting in economy class was beneath them. Waiting 48 hours for a different flight meant risking federal arrest. Faced with the choice between flying in the main cabin with their children or flying in first-class luxury without them, they chose the champagne and the lie-flat beds. They literally discarded their own flesh and blood because they refused to compromise their standard of living for a 14-hour flight. The sheer, unadulterated selfishness of that decision was so profoundly monstrous that it defied all rational comprehension. They had packed their designer luggage, prioritized their own comfort, and left their children shivering on a concrete porch in the dark. A cold, sharp anger settled deep into my bones. It was a completely different sensation than the panic I had felt earlier this morning. This was absolute clarity. My brother was not just a white-collar criminal. He was a deeply broken, morally bankrupt human being who viewed his own children as disposable accessories. His wife was a willing, eager accomplice who used her pregnancy as a shield while abandoning her toddlers. And my father had facilitated the entire operation, financing their escape while trying to bully me into becoming their unpaid permanent nanny. I pushed my chair back from the desk and stood up. I walked out of my home office and moved quietly down the hallway toward the guest bedroom on the ground floor. I opened the door just a fraction of an inch, careful not to let the hinges creak. The room was warm and dimly lit by the morning sun filtering through the blinds. All 4 children were fast asleep on the massive king-sized bed. The oldest boy had one arm thrown protectively over his youngest sister. They looked so peaceful, completely unaware of the staggering betrayal that had brought them to my home. I watched them sleep for a long moment, making a silent, unbreakable vow. My family had spent my entire life treating me like an afterthought, a backup plan to be utilized only when convenient. They had underestimated my intelligence, my resilience, and my capacity for retaliation. They believed I would simply absorb this burden and keep my mouth shut to preserve the fragile illusion of our family legacy. I closed the bedroom door softly and returned to my office. I sat back down at my desk and looked at the digital dossier I had compiled. The evidence was irrefutable. The financial records, the deleted emails, the cryptocurrency ledger, the property deeds, and now the flight manifest detailing their cowardly, luxurious escape route. I had everything I needed to bring their empire crashing down around them. I checked the current flight status on the airline portal. Their plane was currently over the Atlantic Ocean, approximately 4 hours away from landing in Paris. They were sitting in their first-class suites, disconnected from the world, completely oblivious to the fact that I held the keys to their destruction. They thought they had secured their freedom. They thought they had won. I reached for my phone, ready to initiate the next phase of my plan. I needed backup to secure the children, and I needed to deliver the evidence to the authorities before my brother's connecting flight departed from Paris. The timer was ticking down, and I was not going to waste another second. I turned my attention back to the dual monitors illuminating my dark office. The raw data of my family's financial treason sat in disorganized clusters across my desktop. It was time to build the weapon that would dismantle their entire lives. As a forensic accountant, I knew that presenting a massive volume of raw data to federal authorities was practically useless without a coherent, undeniable narrative. Law enforcement agencies were chronically overwhelmed. If I wanted them to intercept Trent before he boarded his connecting flight in Paris, I had to hand them a completed puzzle, not a box of scattered pieces. I opened a fresh encrypted document and began typing. I titled the file with Trent's full legal name, his company identification number, and the specific federal statutes he had violated. I structured the dossier with absolute clinical precision. Section 1 detailed the origin of the stolen capital. I attached the original prospectus for the tech startup and cross-referenced it directly with the incoming wire logs from the Regional Teachers Union Pension Fund. I highlighted the exact $15 million figure, making it impossible for any reviewing agent to overlook the sheer magnitude of the theft. I was not just reporting a white-collar crime. I was reporting the devastation of thousands of working-class retirement accounts. Section 2 focused entirely on my father. This was the most difficult part to write, not because of any lingering affection, but because Richard was incredibly meticulous at hiding his tracks. I systematically laid out the architecture of his cover-up. I attached the fabricated audit reports his firm had generated, placing them side by side with the deleted internal emails where he explicitly ordered his chief financial officer to manipulate the ledger. I created a clear step-by-step timeline showing exactly how Richard had weaponized his investment firm to shield his son from the independent auditor. I made sure the evidence proved Richard was not a negligent bystander. He was an active, willing co-conspirator who had risked federal prosecution to launder stolen money. Section 3 mapped the escape route. I outlined the complex web of shell companies, the cryptocurrency conversions, and the final offshore property purchase in the Mediterranean. I attached the flight manifests, showing their current trajectory over the Atlantic Ocean, emphasizing their highly suspicious decision to abandon their 4 young children on a freezing porch, simply because they could not secure premium airline seating. I highlighted the tight time frame. The authorities had less than 4 hours to flag Trent and his wife through Interpol before they landed in France and boarded their final untraceable flight to a country with no extradition treaty. With the narrative formally constructed, I began the rigorous process of securing the digital perimeter. Richard had access to elite corporate security teams. Once he realized I was not cooperating with his demands, he would inevitably try to scrub his servers and target my network to destroy any evidence I might have gathered. I disconnected my primary workstation from the standard internet connection. I transferred the entire master dossier, along with every piece of supporting raw data, onto 3 separate military-grade encrypted hard drives. I placed one drive in my fireproof wall safe. I slipped the second drive into my purse for immediate physical transport. I uploaded the final copy through a secure, anonymized virtual private network to a decentralized cloud server hosted in a completely different legal jurisdiction. Even if my father sent a team of corporate fixers to smash every computer in my house, the evidence would survive. I sat back and stared at the final compiled dossier on my screen. The power dynamic of my entire existence had just violently flipped. For my entire life, I had been the sensible, quiet backup plan. I was the reliable, invisible foundation they took for granted. They assumed my independence meant I was isolated, weak, and easily bullied. They believed that throwing money at expensive lawyers and driving luxury vehicles made them untouchable. They looked at me, a single woman living alone in the suburbs, and saw nothing but an empty vessel they could fill with their own overwhelming responsibilities. They had absolutely no idea that they had just foolishly handed the ultimate detonator to a highly trained specialist who actively dismantled corrupt corporate empires for a living. I felt a sudden, powerful surge of profound, icy calm wash slowly through my veins. The initial anxiety and emotional shock from the early morning drop-off had completely evaporated from my mind. I now held the absolute, undeniable destruction of their false, glittering legacy right in the palm of my hand. I was going to ruthlessly strip away Trent's unearned wealth, fully expose Jasmine's hollow vanity, and permanently tear down the pristine corporate fortress my father had spent 40 long years building. I reached across my desk for my phone. The immediate physical safety of my nieces and nephews was secured within the walls of my home, and the legal documentation of their abandonment was officially filed with the local police precinct. The financial evidence was locked behind layers of unbreakable encryption. The trap was fully set, and the only thing left to do was spring it. I needed to ensure that the children had a permanent, loving environment that was completely shielded from my parents' inevitable legal fallout. I also needed to transmit the dossier to the precise federal agents who had the authority to pull Trent off that airplane in Paris. I opened my contacts list and found the private number of the one person connected to Jasmine who actually possessed a single shred of moral integrity. I tapped his name and raised the phone to my ear, listening to the steady, rhythmic hum of the dial tone. I took a deep breath, focusing on the upcoming conversation. I was perfectly ready to execute the next phase of my retaliation to bring my family's criminal enterprise to a complete and devastating halt forever. I scrolled through my encrypted contact list, searching for the one person connected to Jasmine who possessed an actual moral compass. David was 38 years old, a highly respected pediatrician, and Jasmine's older brother. He was also entirely estranged from her. David had cut ties with his sister 2 years ago, after a bitter dispute over her reckless spending and toxic superficiality. He had seen right through Trent's Silicon Valley facade and refused to participate in their extravagant charade. My mother had always spoken of David with quiet disdain, claiming he was jealous of Jasmine's lifestyle. In reality, David simply possessed the integrity that my family completely lacked. I found his number a direct line to his private pediatric clinic in Chicago and pressed the call button. The line rang twice before a receptionist answered, but I bypassed the formalities, stating it was a severe family emergency regarding his nieces and nephews. Within 30 seconds, the hold music clicked off and David's deep, calm voice filled the line. "Paige," he said, sounding genuinely surprised. "This is an unexpected call. Is everything all right with the children?" I did not waste time with pleasantries or gentle transitions. As a forensic accountant, I knew the value of delivering the bottom line first. "David, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Trent and Jasmine fled the country early this morning. They are currently on a transatlantic flight heading toward a safe country in the Mediterranean. They are running from a massive federal embezzlement investigation." The line went dead silent. I could hear the faint sound of a medical monitor beeping in the background of his office. "Paige, what are you talking about?" he asked, his professional calm fracturing instantly. "Fled the country. Where are the kids?" "That is why I am calling you," I replied, my voice steady and firm. "At 5 o'clock this morning, they drove to my house, unloaded the 4 children onto my front porch, and sped off into the dark. They did not knock. They did not say goodbye. They abandoned their own kids in the freezing cold because they could not secure enough premium airline tickets for their escape. The police have already been here. I signed emergency 48-hour guardianship papers to keep your nieces and nephews out of the foster care system." I heard a sharp, heavy intake of breath. The sound of a pen dropping onto a desk echoed through the speaker. David was a pediatrician who dedicated his life to healing children. The concept of a mother abandoning her toddlers on a freezing porch was antithetical to everything he stood for. "Jasmine abandoned them," he repeated the words, sounding hollow, as if he were struggling to process the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. "She just left them on a porch." "Yes," I confirmed. "They are safe now. They are sleeping in my guest room. I have fed them and the house is completely secured." "But David, the situation is about to explode. I have spent the last few hours uncovering the financial fraud. Trent stole $15 million from a teachers' union pension fund. My father actively helped him launder the money and cover his tracks. I have compiled a full digital dossier of their crimes, and I am turning it over to the federal authorities the minute I hang up this phone. The authorities will intercept them. My parents will be implicated. This entire family is about to become a highly publicized federal crime scene." David did not panic. His medical training kicked in, replacing his initial horror with focused operational clarity. "Are the children physically unharmed?" he asked, his voice shifting into the authoritative tone of a doctor assessing a trauma situation. "Did they suffer any exposure from the cold?" "They were shivering and terrified," I reported truthfully. "But they are physically unharmed. The emotional damage is another story entirely. The oldest boy is trying to parent the toddlers. He knows his parents ran away." "That ends today," David stated, his voice hardening with absolute resolve. "Jasmine always prioritized designer handbags over her own blood, but this is a level of depravity I never thought she could reach." Paige. "I am pulling my clinic schedule right now. I am handing my appointments over to my partners. I will be on the next available flight out of Chicago. I am coming to Seattle." I felt a massive wave of relief wash over me. I had fully prepared to fight this battle alone, but knowing the children would have a stable, loving biological relative on their side changed the entire landscape. My parents would undoubtedly attempt to use their wealth to seize custody of the kids, viewing them as property rather than human beings. Having David present a respected medical professional with no ties to my father's fraudulent empire provided the ultimate legal shield. "Thank you, David," I said earnestly. "My parents will likely show up at my door demanding I sign permanent guardianship papers so they can wash their hands of the situation. They want me to be the silent, unpaid nanny. I need a united front to protect these kids from the fallout. You have my word." David promised, the fierce protectiveness in his tone echoing my own. "We will protect them. Send me your address. I will text you my flight itinerary as soon as it is booked. Do whatever you need to do with the authorities' page. Burn Trent and Jasmine to the ground. They deserve every single second of the prison sentence coming their way. I will be there by tonight." We disconnected the call. I set the phone down on my desk, feeling the alliances shift and solidify in real time. The power dynamic was no longer just me against a corrupt family dynasty. I had secured the perimeter around the innocent lives caught in the crossfire. Now it was finally time for me to drop the heavy federal hammer completely and permanently upon them. I severed the connection with David and placed my phone face down on the mahogany desk. The ambient glow of my dual monitors reflected off the polished wood, illuminating the digital weapon I had spent the last several hours forging. The dossier was complete. It contained every fraudulent ledger, every deleted internal email from my father's investment firm, the offshore shell company registrations, and the cryptocurrency routing numbers. But having the weapon was only half the battle. Delivering it to the right target with absolute precision was what separated a minor corporate headache from a catastrophic federal takedown. Ordinary whistleblowers submit findings through generic online portals where data languishes in bureaucratic purgatory for weeks before a junior analyst even glances at the file. I did not have weeks. I had less than 3 hours before Trent and Jasmine landed at Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris to catch their untraceable connecting flight. I needed a direct, immediate strike. Fortunately, years of dismantling corrupt corporate empires had allowed me to build a highly specialized network of federal contacts. I opened my secure encrypted email client and initiated a new message. In the recipient field, I typed the direct operational email addresses of 2 senior federal investigators I had collaborated with on a massive tech embezzlement case 3 years ago. The first was Special Agent Gregory Harrison at the Federal Bureau of Investigation White Collar Crime Division. The second was Chief Inspector William Bradley at the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. Both men were ruthless, efficient, and notoriously aggressive when it came to pension fund fraud. I kept the subject line devoid of emotional language. Subject: urgent flight interception required $15 million pension fund. Embezzlement flight manifest attached. I began typing the body of the email with swift, calculated keystrokes. I stated my name and my professional credentials to immediately establish credibility. I outlined the core of the crime in 2 concise paragraphs, detailing how Trent had siphoned $15 million from the Regional Teachers Union Pension Fund through his artificial intelligence startup, Apex Dynamics. I explained how the capital had been systematically washed through phantom consulting firms and converted into untraceable cryptocurrency. Then I moved to the most critical intelligence. I typed out the exact flight number, the airline, and the specific first-class seat assignments Trent and Jasmine currently occupied over the Atlantic Ocean. I provided their full legal names, their passport numbers, and their dates of birth. I made it explicitly clear that their final destination was a sovereign Mediterranean nation lacking an active extradition treaty with the United States. I emphasized that if the suspects were allowed to board their connecting flight in Paris, the stolen pension funds and the perpetrators would be permanently out of federal reach. I did not spare my father. I dedicated a separate, highly detailed paragraph to Richard's active complicity in the cover-up. I explained how his firm manipulated the initial audit, utilizing his secure network to establish offshore proxy accounts. I clarified that Richard was not a victim of his son's deception, but rather the primary financial architect of the money laundering operation. I attached the encrypted dossier file, included the decryption key in a separate self-destructing message, and hit send. The progress bar flashed across my screen, the massive file uploaded carrying the absolute destruction of my family's fabricated legacy. The screen displayed a green confirmation checkmark. I leaned back in my chair and watched the digital clock in the corner of my monitor tick forward. I knew Harrison and Bradley. I knew their protocols. If my email hit their priority inbox with those specific trigger words, the response would be instantaneous. Exactly 8 minutes after the transmission confirmed, my private cell phone vibrated across the desk. The caller identification displayed a restricted federal number. I answered on the second ring. "This is Paige Evans," I stated clearly. "Paige, it is Agent Harrison," the deep, gravelly voice on the other end responded. "Inspector Bradley is on a secure line with us. We received your dossier. I have my data analysts verifying the encrypted attachments right now, but based on your summary, we have a massive time-sensitive crisis on our hands. Tell me this intelligence regarding the flight manifest is current." "It is absolutely current," I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of panic. "They are currently over the Atlantic. You have approximately 2 hours and 45 minutes before they touch down in Paris. If they make that connection, they vanish. The property deed in the dossier proves they have secured a luxury fortress in a jurisdiction you cannot touch." "I hear you loud and clear," Inspector Bradley chimed in, his tone sharp and commanding. "We are initiating an emergency freeze on every domestic asset tied to Apex Dynamics and Richard's investment firm immediately. Paige, your father's involvement elevates this from a startup scam to a highly sophisticated institutional laundering operation. We are locking down his accounts before he can move another dime." "I need an immediate operational pivot," Agent Harrison interrupted, his voice barking orders to someone off speakerphone. "Paige, we are bypassing standard bureaucratic channels. I am contacting the legal attaché at the American Embassy in Paris right now. We are going to initiate an urgent red notice through Interpol. We cannot arrest them in international airspace, but we can absolutely coordinate with French authorities to intercept them at the arrival gate before they even reach the transit lounge." "Do whatever you have to do," I said coldly. "They abandoned their 4 young innocent children on my freezing front porch at exactly 5 o'clock this morning to execute this cowardly escape. They believe they are safe. Prove them wrong." The secure call disconnected with a sharp click. I set the phone down. The federal machinery was now fully activated, a relentless, unstoppable force, barreling directly toward my brother's first-class seat. My parents were undoubtedly mobilizing their own offensive against me to secure my permanent silence. I turned my gaze toward the security monitors, ready for their inevitable desperate arrival at my front door. They still believed they were the puppet masters of this family dynamic. They still thought they could bully me into compliance and bury their crimes under a mountain of intimidation and false promises. They were entirely oblivious to the fact that I had just signed their destruction into federal law. The digital snare was perfectly set, and the absolute collapse of their corrupt empire was now only a matter of minutes away. I took a slow, steady breath. I waited. The wait lasted exactly 22 minutes. The heavy silence of my home was violently shattered by a frantic, aggressive pounding on the front door. The loud thuds echoed through the foyer, accompanied by the muffled sound of my mother's shrill voice demanding immediate entry. I did not flinch. I did not rush. I simply turned my attention back to the security feed displayed on my wall-mounted iPad. Standing on my porch, glaring directly into the high-definition camera lens, was Barbara. Her face was flushed, her designer coat hastily buttoned over her clothes. Beside her stood my father, Richard, his jaw locked in a rigid line of barely suppressed rage. Flanking them was a third man, wearing a bespoke gray suit and clutching a thick leather briefcase. He had the unmistakable predatory posture of a high-priced corporate fixer. They had mobilized their heavy artillery, completely convinced that a display of wealth, authority, and parental aggression would crush my defiance into dust. I checked the secondary camera feed from the guest bedroom. The four children were still safely tucked away, exhausted by the morning's trauma and oblivious to the monsters pacing outside. I smoothed the lapels of my blazer, ensuring my posture projected absolute, unshakable confidence. I walked to the foyer and unlocked the deadbolt. Before I could even pull the door fully open, Richard shoved his way across the threshold. He invaded my personal space, attempting to use his physical size to establish immediate dominance. Barbara followed close behind, her eyes darting around my pristine entryway before locking onto me with pure venom. The lawyer stepped in last, closing the heavy oak door behind him with a quiet, ominous click. "What is the meaning of this insolence?" Richard bellowed, his voice booming through the corridor. "You do not hang up on your mother. You do not dare involve local law enforcement in private family matters. We are here to fix the massive, embarrassing mess you created this morning." I stepped back, maintaining a comfortable distance, completely unfazed by his manufactured outrage. "Good morning, Dad." "Mom, I see you brought legal counsel to a family discussion. How very characteristic of you." The man in the gray suit stepped forward, offering a slick, practiced smile. "Ms. Evans, I am Arthur Vance, senior counsel for your father's investment firm. I am here to facilitate a smooth, mutually beneficial resolution to this unfortunate misunderstanding regarding your brother's children." "There is no misunderstanding, Mr. Vance," I replied, my voice smooth and chillingly polite. "My brother and his wife committed felony child abandonment at 5 o'clock this morning. I secured the children under emergency police supervision. The facts are incredibly simple. Please step into the living room. I would love to see how you plan to spin this." I gestured toward this formal seating area. Richard scoffed, marching past me and throwing himself onto my white leather sofa. Barbara sat beside him, crossing her legs tightly, radiating hostility. Arthur Vance remained standing, opening his leather briefcase and extracting a thick stack of legal documents printed on heavy watermarked paper. He placed them deliberately onto my glass coffee table. "We are not here to spin anything," Paige Barbara snapped, pointing a manicured finger at the paperwork. "We are here to clean up your dramatic overreaction. Trent and Jasmine are currently unavailable. They entrusted the children to your care, and instead of being a supportive sister, you panicked. You are going to sign those papers right now. They grant you long-term formal guardianship. It legally protects you, and it keeps Child Protective Services completely out of our family's business." I looked down at the thick stack of papers. They were drafted with incredible speed, a testament to the desperate panic currently gripping my father's firm. By signing those documents, I would legally absolve Trent and Jasmine of their parental duties, shielding them from criminal abandonment charges. I would become the permanent, unpaid custodian of their collateral damage, allowing them to live out their days in a Mediterranean fortress without a single legal tether pulling them back to reality. "Sign the damn papers," Paige Richard ordered, leaning forward and tapping the glass table. "We do not have time for your typical middle child rebellion. Trent is executing a highly sensitive international expansion for his company. He needs absolute focus. You will do your duty to this family, or I swear to God I will personally ensure your accounting career is destroyed by noon tomorrow." I did not touch the pen Vance offered me. I looked at the lawyer instead. "Mr. Vance," I asked quietly, "are you aware that advising a client to force a signature under duress and extortion is a direct violation of the American Bar Association's ethical guidelines? Or do you normally facilitate human trafficking contracts for fleeing felons before your morning coffee?" Vance's slick smile faltered. His eyes narrowed. "Ms. Evans, I strongly caution you against making defamatory accusations. These documents simply formalize a necessary family arrangement. If you refuse to sign, you open yourself up to massive liability. You currently hold 4 minors without permanent legal authorization. My clients could easily argue you unlawfully detained them. We are offering you legal protection. I suggest you take it." I let out a sharp, genuine laugh. The sound echoed through the high ceilings, visibly startling my parents. "You think you can intimidate a senior forensic accountant with cheap legal threats?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. "I signed a temporary emergency guardianship order, verified by an active duty police officer. I hold the legal high ground. You hold a stack of worthless paper designed to cover up an international flight from justice. Richard stood up, his face flushing deep crimson. He stepped toward me, raising his hand as if he might actually strike me. "You ungrateful, vindictive little wretch," he roared. "You will sign those papers right now. You are going to take those kids, keep your mouth shut, and do exactly what I tell you to do." I did not back away. I looked my father dead in the eye, feeling the absolute power of the trap I had set snapping shut around him. "I am not signing anything," I stated with lethal calm, "but since you are so eager to handle family business, I think it is time we check in on the proud parents. Let us see how their international expansion is going." I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my phone, fully prepared to deliver the final crushing blow. I tapped the screen of my smartphone, swiping past my encrypted email client and opening the video calling application. My father stepped forward, his face a mask of aggressive confusion. He demanded to know who I was contacting and ordered me to put the device away. I completely ignored him. Instead, I activated the screen mirroring feature on my device, syncing my phone display directly to the massive 85-inch smart television mounted above my living room fireplace. The dark screen flared to life, illuminating the tense faces of my parents and their slick corporate attorney. I selected Trent's contact name and hit the video call button. The ringing tone echoed loudly through the high-end surround sound speakers of my living room. "What kind of childish game is this?" Barbara snapped, crossing her arms tightly. "Your brother is in the middle of a highly sensitive business transit. Hang up this instant." I kept my eyes locked on the television screen. "He is not conducting business, Mom," I replied coldly. "He is running, and I think it is time we all check in on his progress." The ringing stopped. The screen flickered, adjusting to the bright ambient lighting of an exclusive airport terminal. The high-definition video feed stabilized, projecting my brother and sister-in-law into my living room in larger-than-life detail. They were lounging comfortably in the ultra-luxurious private VIP lounge at John F. Kennedy International Airport, enduring their brief layover before their connecting flight to Paris. Trent was slumped in the plush leather armchair, his collar unbuttoned, looking infinitely more relaxed than the frantic fugitive who had dumped his children on my porch hours earlier. Jasmine sat beside him, casually sipping from a crystal flute of vintage champagne. She was still wearing her heavy designer trench coat and oversized sunglasses, looking every bit the entitled aristocrat she pretended to be. When the video connected, Trent leaned forward, expecting to see his father's face, confirming that the legal mess had been successfully swept under the rug. Instead, his smile faltered as he stared at my face on his screen. "Paige," Trent asked, his voice echoing through my living room speakers. "Why are you calling me from Dad's secure line channel? Where is he?" "I am standing right here in my living room, Trent." I answered, my tone razor-sharp and perfectly calm. "Dad is sitting on my sofa. He brought his expensive corporate fixer to force me into signing your guardianship papers. I just thought we should all have a little family reunion before you board your flight to France." Jasmine let out a sharp, mocking laugh. She leaned into the frame, pushing her sunglasses up onto her immaculate box braids. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her champagne, her eyes dancing with malicious amusement. "Oh, let me guess," Jasmine sneered. "You are calling to complain about the kids. Listen to me, Paige. You need to get over yourself and sign those papers right now. We gave you the ultimate gift. You are a 33-year-old spinster who spends her nights alone with spreadsheets. You should be down on your knees thanking us for giving your empty, pathetic life a little bit of maternal purpose." Richard shifted uncomfortably on the sofa behind me. Even he seemed momentarily stunned by the sheer, unadulterated venom pouring from his daughter-in-law's mouth. "Maternal purpose," I repeated, tasting the bitter irony of her words. "Is that what you call abandoning 4 terrified children on a freezing concrete porch at 5 o'clock in the morning? You dumped your own flesh and blood like expired luggage because you could not secure enough first-class tickets for your escape route." Jasmine rolled her eyes dramatically, waving her hand dismissively at the camera. "Do not be so dramatic, Paige. We had a highly stressful morning. Trent's startup required an immediate permanent relocation to our new Mediterranean property. We simply could not handle the logistical nightmare of dragging 4 crying children through international customs. Besides, they are better off with you. You have absolutely nothing else going on in your life. Consider this your full-time job now. I kept my posture rigid, ensuring my face revealed none of the satisfaction blooming in my chest. She was freely admitting to the abandonment and the international flight on a live mirrored video feed. So the story about the relaxing baby moon to Dubai was a complete fabrication, I stated, turning my head slightly so my parents could hear the undeniable truth straight from the source. You are fleeing to a non-extradition country because the independent auditor caught the $15 million pension fund embezzlement. Trent's face went completely white. The relaxed posture vanished. He dropped his phone slightly, the camera angle shifting to show the sprawling tarmac outside the VIP lounge window. "How do you know about the auditor?" Trent demanded, his voice cracking with sudden raw panic. "How do you know about the Mediterranean property?" Jasmine snatched the phone from his hand, centering her own glaring face on the screen. "It does not matter what she thinks she knows, Trent." She turned her wrath back to me. "You listen to me, you jealous, bitter little accountant. We have $15 million sitting safely in offshore accounts that you cannot touch." Richard handled the compliance officers. Richard scrubbed the servers. "We are untouchable. We are boarding a first-class flight to Paris in exactly 20 minutes, and from there we are untouchable. You are going to sign those guardianship papers, raise those brats, and keep your mouth shut, or your father will personally destroy your entire career." The silence in my living room was deafening. I slowly turned my head to look at my father. Richard was sitting completely frozen on my white leather sofa. All the blood had drained from his face. His corporate fixer was staring at the television screen in absolute unmitigated horror. Jasmine had just explicitly confessed to grand larceny international flight to avoid prosecution and child abandonment. Furthermore, she had just directly implicated my father in a massive federal money laundering scheme and a coordinated corporate cover-up, broadcasting his crimes loudly and clearly into the room. I turned my attention back to the television screen, locking eyes with my deeply arrogant, thoroughly doomed sister-in-law. "You are incredibly confident for someone who possesses such a fundamental misunderstanding of the situation, Jasmine," I said smoothly. "You truly believe you are untouchable because you have money and a first-class ticket. But you forgot one very important detail about who I am and what I do for a living. I do not just sit in front of spreadsheets, I dismantle corrupt empires." Trent grabbed the phone back, his eyes wide with mounting terror. "Paige, what did you do?" he shouted. "What did you do?" I offered them a bright, genuinely radiant smile. "I declined your generous offer of maternal purpose," I replied, and I returned the favor. I took a slow breath, relishing the absolute power of this moment. "Enjoy your champagne, Trent. It will be your last glass." I watched the confusion ripple across Trent's face. He blinked, staring at the camera lens as if trying to decipher a foreign language. Jasmine tightened her grip on her crystal flute, her manufactured confidence finally showing a hairline fracture. Her eyes darted off screen, sensing a shift in the atmosphere of the exclusive terminal. "What exactly are you talking about?" Trent demanded, his voice dropping an octave, a defensive edge creeping into his tone. "What exactly did you do, Paige?" I took a slow, deliberate breath, savoring the absolute control I possessed in this room and across the country. "I want you to do me a favor, Trent. Turn your head. Look past the complimentary buffet. Look straight out the glass doors of the VIP lounge." On the massive television screen, the camera jerked violently as Trent spun around. The background blurred for a fraction of a second before refocusing on the frosted glass double doors leading into the exclusive sanctuary. For a brief moment, nothing happened. Jasmine let out a huff of breathless irritation, preparing to launch another string of insults about my solitary life. Then the glass doors burst open. They did not just swing wide, they were shoved apart with calculated tactical aggression. A half-dozen men and women wearing dark tactical vests, emblazoned with bright yellow FBI lettering, flooded into the pristine lounge. The elite tranquility of the room evaporated instantly. Travelers gasped, scrambling backward, abandoning their rolling luggage as the federal agents moved with terrifying synchronized speed directly toward my brother's seating area. Trent Jasmine shrieked, the sound tearing through my living room speakers with ear-piercing volume. Her crystal flute slipped from her manicured fingers, shattering into dozens of glittering pieces across the polished airport floor. The camera feed tumbled wildly. Trent had dropped his phone onto the plush carpet in his sheer panic. The lens pointed upward, at a skewed angle, capturing the ceiling fixtures and the frantic intercepting bodies of the federal agents. But the microphone was still perfectly active, broadcasting their absolute destruction in high-definition audio. Trenton Evans, a booming authoritative voice, echoed through the speaker. Federal Bureau of Investigation, keep your hands exactly where I can see them. You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, embezzlement, and flight to avoid prosecution. Jasmine Evans, step away from your husband and place your hands behind your back immediately. No, Jasmine screamed, her voice losing every ounce of its aristocratic polish, descending into a guttural wail of sheer panic. You cannot do this. We have a flight to Paris. We are VIPs. Get your hands off me. I am pregnant, ma'am. Comply immediately, or you will be restrained. An agent barked, the sound of handcuffs clicking sharply in the background. I stood in my living room, watching the skewed video feed, listening to the sounds of my brother and sister-in-law being physically subdued, handcuffed, and stripped of their unearned dignity. Trent was sobbing, a pathetic, high-pitched whimper that confirmed his complete capitulation. He was begging the agents, offering them bribes, offering to call his father, demonstrating how truly weak he was without his manufactured shield of wealth. I turned my back to the television screen and faced my parents. Richard was absolutely paralyzed. His mouth hung slightly open, his chest barely rising. The color had drained from his face entirely, leaving his skin a sickly, ashen gray. He looked like a man who had just watched his own execution broadcast live. Barbara sat beside him, clutching her throat, her eyes wide with a horror so profound it rendered her completely mute. She could not process that the golden child was currently being hauled out of a public airport in federal handcuffs. William Thorne, the high-priced corporate fixer, was already backing away from the coffee table. His slick demeanor had vanished, replaced by the sheer, unadulterated instinct of legal self-preservation. He was staring at the television, calculating the blast radius of the nuclear bomb I had just detonated. You thought I was just an obedient spinster hoarding money in the suburbs, I said, my voice cutting through the heavy silence of the living room, perfectly layered over the distant sounds of Miranda rights being read on the television behind me. You thought my independence meant I was weak and easily manipulated. But I am a senior forensic accountant, Dad. I do not just balance ledgers. I hunt financial predators. I dismantle corrupt empires. Richard finally found his voice, a raspy, breathless wheeze. What did you do to him? I did not do anything to him, I replied coldly, crossing my arms over my chest. I just handed the Internal Revenue Service and the FBI a highly detailed map to the $15 million he stole from a working-class pension fund. But more importantly, Dad, I handed them a map directly to you. Richard flinched violently, as if I had physically struck him across the face. I accessed your secure corporate servers this morning. I continued, taking a deliberate step toward him. I bypassed your encryption protocols. I downloaded the fabricated audit reports you ordered your compliance officers to generate. I extracted the deleted internal emails where you explicitly instructed your chief financial officer to manipulate the ledger to hide Trent's theft. I pulled the metadata proving you used your firm's secure network to establish those offshore proxy accounts in the Cayman Islands. William Thorne snapped his briefcase shut with a loud, definitive crack. He did not look at my father. He looked at the front door. I sent the entire digital dossier to Special Agent Harrison at the FBI and Chief Inspector Bradley at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, Weiss stated, locking eyes with Richard, ensuring he understood the absolute finality of his situation. They are not just freezing Trent's assets. They have already initiated an emergency freeze on every single domestic account tied to your investment firm. They know you are the primary financial architect of this money laundering operation. They are coming for your firm, Dad. They are coming for your legacy. And they are absolutely coming for you today. You cannot prove that Richard stammered, desperation bleeding heavily into his voice. It was a mistake, a compliance error. My lawyers will bury this in litigation for decades. I smiled, a sharp, lethal expression that held zero warmth. You can try selling that compliance error to a federal judge, but Jasmine just explicitly confessed to the entire international cover-up on a recorded video call in front of a sworn officer of the court. I gestured politely toward William Thorne. Speaking of which, Mr. Thorne, as an officer of the court, you are now a material witness to a voluntary confession of federal crimes. I imagine you have some urgent ethical obligations to attend to before the feds raid your office, too. Thorne did not hesitate for even a single fraction of a second. He bolted for the foyer, unlocked the deadbolt with frantic hands, and practically ran out of my house, leaving the front door swinging wide open in his wake. The corporate shield had officially deserted them. Barbara finally broke her silence, letting out a ragged, devastated sob. She fell forward, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking violently as the reality of their absolute ruin crashed down upon her. The television screen behind me finally went black as the video call timed out, severing the connection to JFK Airport. The silence in the room returned, but it was no longer the silence of intimidation. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of their total, irreversible, and entirely self-inflicted defeat. Richard's smartphone shattered the quiet, vibrating violently against the glass surface of my coffee table. The caller ID flashed the name of his chief financial officer. Richard stared at the device as if it were a live grenade. His hands shook so badly he could barely swipe the screen to answer. He pressed the phone to his ear, his breathing shallow and rapid. "Richard, they locked us out!" A panicked voice echoed through the receiver, loud enough for me to hear perfectly. The feds just raided the executive floor. They seized the servers. Every single operating account is frozen. The banks are rejecting our wire transfers. It is all gone. Richard dropped the phone. It clattered against the glass table, the CFO still shouting frantically from the tiny speaker before I reached over and tapped the end call button. The absolute finality of the situation settled over my father. The prestigious investment firm he had built over 4 decades, the foundation of his immense arrogance and social power, had just been legally vaporized in a matter of minutes. He was no longer a feared patriarch. He was a disgraced, broke suspect awaiting federal indictment. Barbara slowly lifted her head from her hands. Her carefully applied makeup was completely ruined, dark streaks of mascara cutting through her thick foundation. She looked at Richard, waiting for him to issue a command to fix the situation, to offer a miraculous loophole. But Richard just stared blankly at the floor, completely broken. When Barbara realized her husband was paralyzed, her survival instincts shifted focus. She turned her desperate, tear-filled eyes toward me. The matriarch who had confidently threatened to destroy my career less than an hour ago was suddenly transforming into a helpless, wounded victim. "Paige, please," Barbara whimpered, sliding off the sofa and dropping to her knees on my living room rug. "You have to stop this. You have to call those agents and tell them it was a misunderstanding. You are going to send your own brother to federal prison. Trent and Jasmine are in handcuffs right now. They are being locked in holding cells like common criminals." "They are common criminals, Mom," I replied, my voice completely devoid of sympathy. "They stole $15 million from working-class teachers. They attempted to flee the country. And worst of all, they abandoned their 4 innocent children on a freezing porch to facilitate their escape. Handcuffs are exactly what they deserve." Barbara lunged forward, grabbing the hem of my blazer. Her grip was tight and frantic. "They made a mistake, a terrible, stupid mistake. But they are family. We are your family. You cannot do this to us. Think about the children, Paige. You are making your own nieces and nephews orphans. You are ripping their parents away from them. How can you be so cruel?" I looked down at the woman who had spent my entire life treating me like an expendable asset. She was utilizing the ultimate emotional blackmail, weaponizing the very children she had deemed a nuisance just yesterday. I reached down and firmly peeled her fingers off my blazer. I took a step back, creating a definitive physical boundary. "Do not dare use those children to manipulate me," I warned, my tone dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You did not care about those children when Trent and Jasmine sped away in the dark. You did not care about them when you ordered me to become their unpaid silent nanny so your golden boy could sip champagne in Paris. I am not making them orphans. Trent and Jasmine made themselves criminals. I am simply ensuring those kids are protected from the toxic fallout of your corruption. I am your mother, Barbara wailed, pounding her fists against the rug. I gave you life. I raised you. How can you look at me and destroy everything we have built? You are tearing this family apart out of sheer petty jealousy. I am not jealous, I stated, my voice echoing with absolute icy finality. I am deeply, profoundly disgusted. This family was never built on love or loyalty. It was built on a foundation of lies, financial fraud, and relentless manipulation. You used my brother as a trophy, and you used me as a doormat. You enabled a thief because his success made you look good at your country club dinners. You chose the illusion of wealth over basic human decency. Richard finally found his voice a weak, hollow rasp. Paige, I will give you whatever you want. The house, the trust funds. I will sign over the remaining clean assets. Just call off the federal agents. Give me time to fix the ledger. You have absolutely nothing left to give me, Dad, I replied, turning my gaze to him. Your accounts are frozen. Your firm is currently being dismantled by federal agents. Your career is permanently over. I do not want your dirty money, and I certainly do not want your empty promises. I already have everything I need. I have my own home, my own successful career, and my own integrity. 3 things you can never take away from me. Barbara let out a guttural, agonizing cry. She realized, perhaps for the first time in her entire life, that she had absolutely no leverage. Her money was gone. Her social standing was obliterated. Her golden child was currently sitting in an airport interrogation room, facing a massive federal prison sentence. And the daughter she had severely underestimated was standing above her, completely impervious to her tears and threats. Get up! I ordered, my voice leaving zero room for debate. Get off my floor! You are going to walk out my front door, and you are never coming back. You will not call me. You will not text me. You will not approach my property. If you attempt to contact the children while they are in my custody, I will have Officer Daniels arrest you for trespassing and harassment. Richard slowly pushed himself off the sofa. He looked like a hollow shell of a man, his shoulders slumped, his arrogant posture completely eradicated. He reached down and grabbed Barbara by the arm, hauling her roughly to her feet. She stumbled, her breath catching in ragged gasps, but she did not fight him. They had been entirely stripped of their power. I escorted them to the foyer. I did not hold the door for them. I simply watched as Richard pulled the heavy oak door open and guided his sobbing wife out onto the front porch. The morning fog had lifted, revealing a bright, clear Seattle sky. It was a beautiful day, completely at odds with the absolute devastation they were currently experiencing. They walked slowly down my driveway toward their luxury sedan. They looked small, pathetic, and utterly defeated. I stepped out onto the threshold, watching them climb into their vehicle. Richard did not even bother to look back. Barbara covered her face, hiding her ruined makeup from the bright sunlight. The engine started with a quiet hum and the car pulled away from the curb, disappearing down the quiet suburban street. I stood on the porch for a long moment, breathing in the crisp, clean air. The heavy, suffocating weight of their expectations, their manipulation, and their constant belittlement had finally been lifted from my shoulders. I had waged a brutal, tactical war against my own family, and I had emerged completely victorious. I turned around, stepped back inside my home, and closed the door. The satisfying metallic click of the deadbolt sliding into place sounded like absolute freedom. I had secured my perimeter. I had protected the innocent. Now it was time to finalize the legal aftermath and secure the future for the 4 children sleeping peacefully down the hall. I pulled out my phone and checked the time. David's flight from Chicago would be landing soon. The next phase of the recovery was about to begin. The doorbell rang exactly 90 minutes after my parents' humiliating departure. I walked to the foyer and swung the heavy oak door open. Standing on my porch was David. He looked exhausted, carrying a single duffel bag over his shoulder, but his eyes were sharp and filled with absolute resolve. He did not bother with formal greetings. He simply dropped his bag in the entryway and pulled me into a fierce, grounding hug. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you for protecting them when my sister abandoned her most basic human duty. I stepped back and offered a tired but genuine smile. They are in the living room. David walked past me, his medical training instantly giving way to pure uncle mode. The moment he stepped into the living room, Marcus jumped up from the sofa. The 8-year-old boy had been trying so hard to be brave all morning, but seeing a familiar, safe face finally broke his rigid composure. Marcus sprinted across the rug and buried his face in David's chest, sobbing openly. David dropped to his knees, wrapping his strong arms around the boy, pulling 5-year-old Leo and 4-year-old Maya into the embrace as well. Even little Chloe waddled over, reaching for her uncle. Watching David hold them, whispering fierce promises of safety and love, solidified every aggressive choice I had made that day. The children finally had a guardian who viewed them as a priority, not an inconvenience. The legal aftermath began the very next morning. David and I walked into the local family court building with a mountain of evidence. Officer Daniels had already submitted his official police report regarding the abandonment, which expedited our emergency hearing. We sat before a family court judge presenting the security footage of Trent and Jasmine fleeing my property, the recorded video call where Jasmine explicitly admitted to abandoning the children for an international escape, and the federal indictment records that had just been unsealed. The judge did not hesitate. The sheer volume of evidence regarding child endangerment and felony flight was overwhelming. Trent and Jasmine were formally stripped of their parental rights, pending their federal criminal trials. David submitted his petition for full legal and physical custody. As a board-certified pediatrician with an immaculate record zero criminal history and a substantial clean income, David was the ideal candidate. The judge granted the petition immediately. The emergency 48-hour guardianship I had signed was officially transferred and upgraded to permanent custody for David. The children were legally safe. They would be moving to Chicago with their uncle, far away from the toxic blast radius of my parents and their corrupt empire. With the physical and legal safety of the children secured, I shifted my focus to their financial future. Trent and Jasmine were facing massive federal asset forfeitures. The authorities were actively seizing the Mediterranean villa, the luxury vehicles, the offshore cryptocurrency wallets, and every single bank account tied to the embezzled pension funds. My father's firm was undergoing a brutal liquidation process to pay back the defrauded teachers. However, as a forensic accountant, I knew exactly how to dig through the wreckage to find the clean capital. I spent 3 full days locked in my home office, aggressively auditing Trent's personal finances from before the startup fraud began. I needed to isolate funds that the federal government could not legally seize. I traced back 5 years and found a legitimate, untouched mutual fund that Trent's paternal grandfather had established for the children when Marcus was born. It contained roughly $400,000 in clean, fully taxed equity. Trent had never touched it because he could not legally access the principal without triggering a massive tax penalty, and Jasmine had likely forgotten it even existed. I immediately contacted a powerhouse estate lawyer who specialized in impenetrable financial structures. David and I sat in her downtown office drafting a trust fund that would serve as an absolute fortress around that money. We transferred the $400,000 into a newly established, highly restricted, irrevocable trust designated exclusively for the health, education, and welfare of the 4 children. I was absolutely ruthless with the stipulations. I named David and myself as the sole co-trustees. We legally mandated that neither Trent, Jasmine, Barbara, nor Richard could ever access, manage, or petition for a single cent of that money. I included a specific poison pill clause stating if my parents ever attempted to sue for access to the trust, the legal fees would be automatically deducted from the principal, and they would be countersued for harassment and frivolous litigation. David read through the final draft of the trust documents, his eyes scanning the dense legal protections I had engineered. He looked up at me, shaking his head in sheer admiration. "You did not just lock the door," Page David said, picking up the heavy luxury pen provided by the lawyer. "You built a solid titanium vault and threw the key directly into the bottom of the ocean." "I am a forensic accountant," I replied smoothly, signing my name on the CO trustee line with a flourish. I know exactly how thieves operate, which means I know exactly how to starve them out. This money belongs to Marcus, Leo, Maya, and Chloe. It will pay for their college tuition. It will pay for their medical expenses. It will give them the head start their biological parents maliciously tried to steal from them. David signed next to mine. The lawyer stamped the documents with her official seal, legally binding the trust into existence. The financial perimeter was now completely impenetrable. Trent and Jasmine would be returning to the United States in federal handcuffs, facing decades in a maximum security prison with absolutely zero assets to their name. Barbara and Richard were currently being evicted from their sprawling estate, their social standing obliterated, their bank accounts seized by the Internal Revenue Service. Their entire corrupt empire had been completely reduced to ash, and I was the one who boldly struck the match. The fallout from the federal indictments was swift, brutal, and highly publicized. The media descended upon my father's investment firm like vultures, broadcasting the seizure of his assets across every single major financial news network. My parents were forced to vacate their sprawling suburban mansion in the dead of night, hauling whatever meager personal items the government had not frozen into a rented moving van. They relocated to a cramped one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city, utterly stripped of the wealth and social status they had weaponized against me my entire life. Trent and his wife did not even make it past the arrival gate in Paris. French authorities promptly detained them on the jet bridge, honoring the Interpol red notice, and expedited their extradition straight back to American soil. They foolishly traded their first-class champagne flutes for federal handcuffs. 6 months passed since that chaotic morning on my front porch, and the dust had finally settled. I was no longer the overlooked, unappreciated backup plan. I had finally taken full control of my own destiny. I sat back comfortably in my ergonomic black leather chair, running a hand over the smooth, polished mahogany of my own massive new desk. Following the highly publicized collapse of my father's money laundering operation, my professional reputation skyrocketed. Corporate boards across the entire country realized that the forensic accountant who single-handedly dismantled her own family's $15 million embezzlement scheme was exactly the kind of ruthless, incorruptible auditor they desperately needed on their payroll. I had left my previous firm and launched my own independent agency. My stunning new luxury corner office occupied the top floor of a premier downtown high-rise, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking, unobstructed view of the Seattle skyline. The space was impeccably designed, echoing my hard-earned independence. There were no noisy family gatherings, no toxic parents demanding my compliance, and absolutely zero false expectations weighing me down. I had built an ironclad sanctuary of success. I managed a team of 20 elite investigators commanding premium consulting fees and living entirely on my own terms. My spectacular million-dollar home remained my incredibly peaceful retreat, a quiet haven where I answered to absolutely no one but myself alone. The most rewarding victory, however, resided far away in Chicago. David reliably sent me weekly updates regarding my growing nephews and nieces. They were all absolutely thriving under his excellent care. Removed from the superficial, neglectful environment their biological parents had subjected them to, the children were finally experiencing genuine stability. David enrolled them in highly rated schools, utilizing the clean trust fund we had established to cover their extracurricular activities and all necessary medical expenses. My oldest nephew had joined a local competitive soccer league, officially shedding the heavy burden of trying to parent his younger siblings. My youngest niece was talking more every single day, surrounded by the warmth and dedicated attention she had previously been denied. David proved to be the exact opposite of his sister, a grounded, highly responsible father figure who prioritized the well-being of the children above all else. I visited them once a month, flying first class not to flee a crime scene, but to spend quality time with the family I had actively chosen to protect. I was the cool, highly successful aunt who brought them educational gifts and taught them the absolute value of fiercely guarding their own self-reliance. A soft chime from my computer monitor pulled my attention away from the panoramic city view. A notification popped up on my screen, originating from the Federal Inmate Communication System. I clicked the secure link, my expression remaining completely neutral. It was an electronic message from Trent. He was currently serving a 20-year sentence in a maximum security federal penitentiary, while his arrogant wife occupied a similar facility in a neighboring state. I opened the digital letter. The text was a pathetic, highly predictable mixture of manufactured guilt and desperate begging. He wrote extensively about the harsh conditions of his confinement, complaining about the terrible food and the constant isolation. He attempted to leverage our shared childhood, insisting that families should always forgive one another, no matter the circumstances. He begged me to release a portion of the Children's Trust Fund to hire a better appellate lawyer, claiming he had fundamentally changed and deserved a second chance at freedom. He even tried to manipulate my emotions by mentioning our parents, stating that my father's health was declining rapidly due to the intense stress of his financial ruin, and that I owed it to them to fix the situation immediately. I read the entire message without feeling a single ounce of pity, anger, or guilt. The emotional tether that once bound me to their toxic demands was completely severed. I did not type a reply. I did not draft a scathing response reminding him that he abandoned his toddlers in the freezing cold. Engaging with his delusion would only grant him the attention he desperately craved. Instead, I moved my cursor to the top right corner of the communication portal. I clicked the red button labeled Block Contact. A confirmation dialog box appeared, asking if I wanted to permanently restrict incoming messages from this specific federal inmate. I clicked Confirm without hesitation. The screen refreshed, erasing Trent's words from my inbox forever. He was a ghost, a permanently deleted file in the archive of my past. I closed the laptop, stood up, and walked over to the towering glass windows. The afternoon sun cast a brilliant golden glow over the bustling city below. I took a deep, steadying breath, feeling the absolute undeniable power and certainty of my success. I had faced the darkest corners of my family's corruption, and I had emerged entirely victorious. I was finally completely free. The gripping story of Paige's triumph over her family's staggering betrayal teaches a profound lesson about self-worth, accountability, and the absolute necessity of establishing impenetrable boundaries. For years, Paige's family marginalized her, treating her independent lifestyle as a flaw, while weaponizing her stability to serve their own chaotic, superficial lives. When Trent and Jasmine abandoned their 4 children to flee a federal indictment, and her parents attempted to force her into a lifetime of unpaid servitude, they relied on a deeply toxic expectation that unconditional family loyalty would blindly trump all logic and self-respect. However, Paige's calculated response illustrates that true empowerment comes from refusing to internalize a dysfunctional family's narrative. Instead of crumbling under the weight of their emotional blackmail or seeking their elusive validation, she utilized her professional expertise and cold logic to dismantle their fraudulent empire. The overarching lesson here is clear: biological relations do not grant a free pass for abuse, neglect, or exploitation. When individuals prioritize their own fabricated legacy and unearned wealth over basic human decency, cutting ties is not an act of malice, it is an act of profound self-preservation and justice. Furthermore, the story underscores that healing often requires us to be our own fierce protectors. By securing her nieces and nephews' financial future through an ironclad trust and ensuring the perpetrators face severe federal consequences, Paige demonstrated that setting boundaries isn't just about walking away. It is about actively protecting the innocent, starving toxicity of its power and reclaiming your own narrative. We are never obligated to be the collateral damage of someone else's reckless, selfish choices. If you find yourself constantly sacrificing your own peace for a family that only values what they can extract from you, take a step back today and draw the boundary that will finally set you free.